fearless as the day you sailed with the Skull Rock podcast. Proceed at your own risk and mark well-be words, ladies. Dead men tell no tale.
Welcome to Skull Rock Podcast, the show about all things Disney and pop culture. Every week we take you behind the scenes of some of your favorite Disney films, theme park attractions, books, music, and so much more. Welcome to the show. I'm Aljon Go, musician and longtime Disney fan. You can email me, Aljon, at skullrockpodcast.com. You can also email Dave, my usual co-host, artist, filmmaker, all-around great guy. Dave at skullrockpodcast.com is his email. You can also follow us on all the social media platforms, including our YouTube page. We are up and running. We've got some great content there, as well as some delightful short content videos that you'll find totally entertaining. So please feel free to check us out there on YouTube and the video version of this podcast, typically on Spotify. But this week, because of the big snowstorms that are happening, I'm cutting this really quick video to let you know that we're not going to go another week without putting out another podcast. Last week was awesome. We had Ed Nowak, former Deputy General Counsel for the Walt Disney Company, on the show. This is week 3. So sit back and relax and enjoy week 3. I'd like to say everyone that's out there affected by the storms here in the United States, the winter storms, stay warm. Thank you for listening to the show. And I hope next week we have Dave back on with us and power gets restored properly. Yes, we're going to keep our fingers crossed and that everybody is safe and sound. So have an excellent week. Enjoy part 3 with Ed Nowak as we talk about Disney and the legal side of things right here on Skull Rock Podcast. Enjoy.
Hey, let's chat.
Let's chat afterwards.
Let's chat. And he said, let's chat again.
Well, Aljon, we are absolutely thrilled to have our next guest back for week 3. Ed Nowak, the Deputy General Counsel of the Walt Disney Company, in parentheses, retired now. Ed, welcome back to the Skull Rock Podcast.
Glad to see you, Dave. Having spent a week in the windowless green room, I've had plenty of time to think, and I'm glad you've let me out, and the audience still hasn't returned. But
okay, well, you know something? We've tried to improve the green room, as everybody's aware. Don Hahn had wrecked it many years ago, and we've been slowly trying to put it back together. So, but it's so great to have you back, because at the end of our last conversation, I wanted to talk this week about some of those crazy cases that the company gets hit with year in and year out. I mean, it's shocking sometimes when you hear some of the cases. But before we do that, I want to talk just for a second about the legal team at Disney, because I'm imagining it's not unlike an animated production where you have people who are specialists in different disciplines. Is the legal department you were overseeing, was that a similar situation where you would cast a case to somebody because they had, they were better at contract law, or they were litigators, or, whatever it was?
yeah, some lawyers had, very particular specialties. Some lawyers had a leaning towards certain kinds of cases, regardless of what the particular subject matter of the case was. The legal department, when I got to the company, was something like 26 lawyers, the entire company. And that includes people in Florida, and there was one in New York. By the time I left, I'm sure it was over 1,000 lawyers worldwide. So the longer you went, the more specialized things had to be. The company was getting so much bigger. It had its fingers into so many pies that you had lawyers that were very specific to those pies. But in my particular group, which always remained a smallish group within the legal department, we built, for the first 6 months or so, I was it. But we gradually added like-minded people with similar experience to mine who had the same interest in learning the company, in getting into the businesses so that we could service across all business lines. And instead of being viewed as, don't go to the lawyers, they're going to say no. Well, sometimes you did have to say no. But more often than not, we wanted to figure out a way to say yes. And we added Rick Clare and Susan Klein, Jack Yellen, Carol Pacula in Florida, all of whom, and I do this gesture as I'm talking to you, it's hands-on. If there was a problem with a ride, you'd crawl underneath the machinery and, with the engineers and figure out what was going on. If you had a problem in a film or with a piece of music, you'd sit down with the people involved and work it through, help fix it, as opposed to just say, well, we can't do this, company can't do this. And I think you got to be familiar with that attitude when you had to deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, as you were talking, I immediately thought to myself, I remember that time I went to you and said, is there any way we could possibly do a one-page agreement with the Dali Foundation in Spain and the Walt Disney Company on exchanging some digitally scanned images from the Destino project? And you didn't say there's no way, it has to be 42 pages of leak. You smiled and said to me, I think I'm going to figure out a way to do that, and you managed to come back with a page and a half. And I thought that was great. And really the half page was mostly the signature block.
Well, somebody wrote very big. Now, there were coordinate branches of the legal department who did the corporate transactions, contract work. There were music lawyers who were on the music business side, as opposed to the music content side. There was a shared attitude. People collaborated. And people, especially in the early years, just the company was jumping and you just wanted to help as much as you could.
Sort of clear the path to allow things to happen, right?
Yeah, it just flashed to my mind one night, the Disney store was in effect born with two guys coming into my office late at night and on my couch. And they said, we got this idea for Disney themed stores. And they talked it through and they said, are we going to have a problem with this, with that, or where we put it or where we test it? And, we worked through all that. And the next thing you knew, the company was announcing the birth of the Disney store, which, for years was very successful.
Sure.
So you wanted to, there are easy ways to say no and easy ways to avoid, harder work along the way, but you want to make it happen, whether it's in a film or a new business or cruise lines or the California Angels or, get in there and make it work. And that was the predominant attitude in the department until things just got, so big that you didn't have, lawyers in Argentina necessarily talking to lawyers in Paris or New York or Florida, and you lost some of that coherence that you really could only have when we were all on the lot together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly, my experience was always a positive one with the legal department because I usually got folded in on things that were animation related to sort of be asked some questions or to help an attorney understand something.
Yes.
Animation related. I always thought that was just a fantastic collaboration, is that if before somebody went running down the hall to file a lawsuit, it was like, well, let's talk to some people who do this.
Exactly. It worked. It flowed both ways.
Yeah.
And I was always grateful to be able to, I'm surrounded by people who know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And yet, they might benefit from my own participation with them.
Yeah. And I'm imagining though you cast the scenes, scenes. You cast the cases. That was a little bit of a Freudian slip there. But it's similar to animation. The director is going to cast scenes to animators that have the strengths to play to a particular thing. And I'm
Exactly.
imagining if you had a case come in, you'd probably be sitting there, gee, I think this would be great for Mary and Jim to tackle or whoever. you
Yep.
know. Go ahead.
We did that.
Yeah, so I want to start to talk a little bit about some of these wacko cases. Our listeners are aware, like the infamous hot cup of coffee at McDonald's drive-through that somebody filed a lawsuit and won millions of dollars because the cup of coffee was so hot it scalded their lap when it spilled. Large multinational corporations get hit with sometimes crazy lawsuits.
Well, remember two things, almost the same thing. Disney is so much in the public eye and a magnet for attention that, a tire company or, a clothing factory is not necessarily going to have. And you've got, on any given day on our properties, tens of thousands of, random incident generators walking around, some people behaving carelessly, and sometimes things go wrong even in attractions with redundant safety systems in them. So things do happen. And your work product is out there every day and for years in theaters and still in theaters to the extent things are getting into theaters. So there are millions of people who are attracted by the output of the company. Sometimes they have a legitimate claim, and other times they're looking at Disney as, a treasure chest that they can stick their hand in and come out with something good. And to an extent that I think most other companies don't experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining that, there's unscrupulous sort of ambulance chaser like lawyers out there that will file a lawsuit and figure that the company will just throw some money at it for it to go away.
And then there are seemingly sincere claimants
Yeah.
who maybe aren't thinking too clearly, who believe in what they are saying and can't let go of it. And, they're not going to get a handout from us if they're just dead wrong. I mean, one, it was sometime in the 90s, and I forget which, it was one of the big animated features in the 90s, and we got a suit by a guy who claimed that, the material, not just the idea, but some of the actual content of the movie was his, that Disney had somehow gotten its hands on, and that was the basis of the movie. Now, he went on in his complaint as a way of demonstrating what he thought would be his bona fides that would add to his credibility. He went on to tell us that he was the inventor of a V8 engine that Cadillac was using in the 90s, and he also claimed credit for creating the Pep Boys, Manny, Mo, and Jack, and for a number of other things, including some relationship with some federal judge. So all of this is in the complaint, which he thinks is enhancing his credibility. And, we took
Wow. Wow.
And what you do then is don't say, oh, this is going to cost us time and money, so let's see whether he'll go away, because people like this typically don't go away. So there are one or two methods in litigation where you can bring things to a quick solution. If you tell the court, here's all the facts, here's everything that's knowable about, where this movie came from, and you challenge the claimant to come up with, at least tell the court, I've got more here, there's more information that's to come, but there isn't any. So the case goes away very quickly, and that's the last you hear from the claimant. Then there are the kind of what used to be called, and maybe still are, the tinfoil hat plaintiff.
I was waiting for that term to come in. I thought about that just moments ago. The tinfoil hat people.
So we did have a stretch for a while of claims from people who alleged that somehow, Disney had implanted something under their skin that was controlling their thinking. Now, lots of companies had tinfoil hat plaintiff type cases, but we had what I think were more interesting ones, including the guy who show every movie that we had. I think this was before the ABC acquisition, so it wasn't like everything on ABC, but to the extent there were Disney shows on ABC. Every one of those was a thinly disguised communication to him and about him. And he went on for, this could have been 100 pages. He had all the titles, all the shows, all the scenarios, identified all of the people who were him, including, I remember, a Disney Sunday movie that they did. It was a Christmas themed movie, and the claimant said that the character that was him was Chester the Christmas Goose. And he basically wanted us to stop. He had had enough of turning on his television and seeing himself portrayed in all of these forms. And so we had to help, gently usher him off stage. And when we were done, we never.
Did he have an attorney representing him? Did somebody actually take that case on?
I don't remember. I mean, it's hard to, some did and some didn't.
So some of these plaintiffs actually were representing themselves.
Yeah, and it was not uncommon to get, well, I referred to like 100-page complaints. Sometimes they came in handwritten. I mean,
really?
People who spent their time, having already been driven over the brink by what they're alleging is happening to them, they spend their time cataloging. And, you can do that. You don't need a lawyer to file a complaint in court. The downside is the lawyer sitting at the company has to read everything. You can't skip.
Right.
And when it runs on for hundreds of pages where you're trying to make sense of the thing in order to know how to go back to the court and say, here's why this can't be, you can nip it in the bud now. Those were not uncommon. And any major film would attract at least one person who believed that their work or sometimes a submission was the source of the end result.
That's most recent with Moana. Moana, they just threw a lawsuit out because somebody had come forward saying that they had taken his idea and, even though the mythology was out there in the Pacific Islands and, that.
Yeah, that was since my time, but that's an exemplar of when I think it's public record that Zootopia had 4, if not 5, I think it actually totaled, because there was an overlap in 2 cases, 4 different lawsuits, claimants that
Claiming ownership.
Some one thing or another that they had created was actually Zootopia. And I can't imagine. All right. It's as though people thought that Disney's creative team just sat around or went around the country looking for things to appropriate and make movies about. Some of the plaintiffs are so sincere in their own beliefs, they just couldn't let go of their conviction that what Disney produced was theirs.
And all of those Zootopia cases were thrown out. They all ended.
I believe so. I think there was one hanging loose when I left the company, but it was someone who had already lost in another venue and was likely to lose wherever the case finally ended up. I think one of them was in Canada and the others were in the United States. So that was a part of the diet. The company would release a movie and we'd expect at least 1, 2, and some of them were, had their own humorous content because you couldn't believe. I mean, the guy thought we were sending him messages that he was a goose. He wasn't offended that it was a goose. It was just the fact that he kept being portrayed in various ways in every show, every movie that we ever produced.
But that's
Could have
I
been
mean,
flattered.
all of this is just it's really becomes it's just the cost of doing business at this point, right? Because anytime Disney comes out with a film, there's virtually, like you said, at least one or two lawsuits of people claiming it was their idea.
Yep.
And they have to defend those things, and defending those costs money.
That's why we were not a profit center, we were a cost center.
Right, absolutely.
You had to go clean up these things rather than doing something that looked maybe more positive. Even though, when you do a lawsuit and it's out there as an actual lawsuit, you're in public view too.
Yeah. And you're also, I would imagine Disney is somewhat at a disadvantage because it's the big bad corporation.
You would hear that a lot when juries were selected. You always ask the trial lawyer asked the jury or the pool, have you been to Disneyland if it's a California case? If it's in Florida, have you been to Walt Disney? Well, you know what the answer is. Have you had a good time? And do you appreciate what they got? Yes. Then you talk to the jury after the trial, if the case goes full trial. And then you hear them talk about, well, you're a business. Sometimes you would do mock trial preparation with a mock jury. And mock juries get very caught up in what they know is an artificial event, and yet they really behave like a real jury. And you're able to monitor them and listen to them talk about the lawyers and listen to them talk about the company. And as much as people love what Disney puts out, they also know it's a business. One guy in one of these sessions said, they're a bunch of sharpshooters, whatever that might have meant to him. But, it was always this kind of love-hate relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes on still. I mean, there's the fans of the company, and then out of one side of the mouth, they love the place. Out of the other side of the mouth, they hate the company for raising the gate price or this or charging too much for that. And, so it is this love-hate relationship with a lot of people.
But, not that we never lost anything in trial work, but the company did have a remarkable record. And in the theme parks, it had a remarkable record for a long time before I got there. I mean, when I started to get into the theme park work, especially at Disneyland, it was really to ramp up from where things had been for a long time. And the way the company handled claims and problems at the park was always with the guest in mind, not necessarily to say it's our fault or if you demand something from us, you're going to get it. But if there's a problem in your day at the park, I always said, if you're going to have a bad experience at the park, it's going to be the best bad experience you've had because the company wants to take care of you. The company wants to make things right for you, but the company is not necessarily going to say or admit its responsibility when it clearly isn't.
Right.
In a lot of circumstances.
Yeah, I know there's some interesting, just when you look at the millions of people that go through the park system a year, the fact that there has to be a certain number of slip and falls and things like that. But the actual safety record for the company is pretty darn stellar.
It's been said that in a number of measurable, comparable situations where statistics are available, that you're actually safer within the berm than you are outside.
Right.
Fewer accidents, fewer certain kinds of injuries. Now, there aren't a lot of cars zooming up and down Main Street, but there are horses and there are train tracks and there are,
ride vehicles on the attractions.
Hazards, sure. And you've got a lot of people whose jobs are to respond to any problem, respond quickly. That we spent a lot of time over the years, making sure that you could have first aid attention with fewer and fewer steps in between the provider and any particular point at which a guest might be incapacitated.
You know, that reminds me of, I marveled at the fact that down in Orlando, the number of EMTs that are behind the scenes. Because, I just got back from Miami, in July. So, it's humid and hot, and people walking around the parks, they might have a medical emergency. And I marveled at how quickly the EMTs are present, because there isn't just one guy, there isn't one EMT team sitting in one area. They're spotted around the park at the different employee entrances. So they can zip in very quickly and take care of somebody that may have fainted from heat stroke or had a medical emergency or whatever it was. And I defy people to say you're going to find that at other places around, around the country, or at other amusement parks, if you will, rather than at, Disney. I mean, it's just remarkable how much care they put into it.
Yeah, and we were, involved periodically in improving and improving and improving that kind of access and that kind of speed. I mean, there are safety people and medical people who knew what they needed and wanted, and there were things we knew we needed and wanted to be able to defend against assertions that we weren't as prepared as people would demand of us. And I think you're right. There's nobody else. Wherever second place is,
it's far away. It's far away. Because, I think when there was an incident that happened, an accident or something, they learned from it. They put in more checks, or, they make adjustments, similar to when the FAA investigates an aircraft accident. Out of that comes some new thing that they want to implement system-wide.
Exactly. And our group was part of putting those kinds of meetings and those kind of analyses together in my early years and periodically afterward. And as the teams got bigger, there were people who became sort of specialists in that, and a synergistic relationship between the safety professionals and the legal departments in the parks to, constantly upgrade that kind of attention and readiness.
There's a great example. I have to laugh a little bit because, I wrote the book on the House of the Future.
Yeah.
And when they put the House of the Future in, they designed sort of Japanese-inspired gardens around it, and they had created these slabs of these concrete platforms that the guests could walk on, but they never intended to have any kind of railings.
Yeah.
Initially. And before the attraction even opened, while they were still doing the slabs and the platforms and the gardens, there were people that said, there is no way we're opening this like that. You have to put in railings, because somebody's going to be talking and walk off the edge and go in the drink.
Those were early days for the park. Things got a little more sophisticated.
Yes.
As time went on. Do I need a handrail?
Yeah, but today, not only are they designing those things in to begin with, there's still a safety pass that is reviewing all of that, and then making suggestions and saying, "Oh no, this needs to be a certain height," or whatever it is.
Yeah, and when the Americans with Disabilities Act came in,
oh boy,
it was enacted, I think, in 1990. But most of the provisions, I think, were not to be effective until 1992. And somebody gave me the job of overall, compliance with the act. And we took some of my team and some of the Florida people, and then some safety people, and added some engineers, and added some construction people we had to go over, and imagine going through the entirety of Walt Disney World, and basically, every countertop had to be a certain height, all kinds of changes in access, changes in sound delivery inside attractions, because this act applied to all kinds of disabilities, and sweeping redo of a lot, without drawing a lot of attention to it, sweeping redo of a lot of the facilities.
But there was nothing that grandfathered things in. Just everything had to be upgraded.
Well, everything that would relate to disability access, coming into the reception area in a hotel, you had to be able to accommodate somebody who was checking in without any other kind of assistance, but was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Well,
so you couldn't even have a step up.
No, and the law, is a strange law in that it's partly legal and partly like a construction code or like a municipal code, and you're kind of melding the two. What kind of disabilities and what kind of relief or access do they need? And then if you're going to make the change physically as opposed to some other way, like for a time we had to read menus to people with visibility problems before there were even Braille menus to hand out. But that was legitimate under the law. You're providing access, so you can read the menus to the guests. So that didn't involve physical changes in the plant. On the other hand, there are lots of other situations where you would have to, just comply with the code. And that involved a lot of construction issues. Yeah. Then you're building Disneyland Paris at the same time, and it's a wholly different world. And yet these are both Disney facilities, so they can't so depart from each other just because of the applicability of local law. So you're looking at how big a bathtub can you have in a hotel room in the Paris park that isn't so different from what we're providing in the safest possible way to a guest at Walt Disney World. You had to kind of reconcile two competing looks, two competing ways of it. And this went on for months. I know we're off on a tangent.
No, that's okay, because I also would just point out that, Disney has always exceeded the building codes in whatever locale that they're putting a theme park. Am I right in sort of saying that in a general statement? Because that was always my impression.
Whether it was 100% or not, the goal was to do more than you absolutely were required to do.
Yeah, you exceeded. You always exceeded.
Because the expectation of Disney is that Disney is the floor, not the ceiling of how you attend to your guest, how you provide your guests. So when it came to safety, the expectation was, Disney was going to go the extra mile.
Yeah.
And if you didn't, you weren't Disney. So, in effect, we set the standard in a lot of ways, but to set it meant to exceed the absolute requirements in order to meet the already heightened expectation of the guest.
Yes.
Because the guest says Disney does it the best.
Yeah. We're starting to bump up against time, but I want to, when we come back next week, I want to talk about some specific cases. You and I have talked about some of this stuff over the years, and I'm thinking of the chopped liver swan.
Don't give it away.
I'm just tipping the card a little bit, okay? But there's some other very interesting cases that when you hear them on their surface, your mouth drops open. You're like, really? Are you serious that actually happened? Because that's how I reacted to it. Okay,
if you think Chester the Goose is a fascinating claim, we have some things growing out of other parts of the company that are meet or exceed. Chester's the floor. There are cases that exceed that.
All right. So when we come back next week, we're just going to dive into some of these crazy cases and talk about that for our fourth episode with you, Ed. And I'm looking forward to it. This has just been very fascinating, and I'm sure our listeners are learning something about what goes on behind the scenes at the company, not only in filmed entertainment, but in the theme parks. And I'm sure we'll be talking about consumer products and things like that. So I'll see you next week. Okay, Ed?
Okay, Dave.
Thank you.
Get out of here!
Come on, Scotty, let's get out of here. Let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here, Lieutenant.
And there was the part 3 of Ed Nowak's awesome interview with us. It's going to be a multi-show drop with Ed Nowak. So we've got another week with him, which is going to be awesome. And then the following week, we're going to have a tribute to Roger Allers that we have planned, former guest of the show. It's going to be awesome. If you love Disney and pop culture, please follow us on all our socials. Once again, follow the show on YouTube as well as Facebook. It's a great place to follow us. You can also check out our Instagram as well at Skull Rock Pod. And that would be great. You can also check out my other show, Dining at Disney Podcast. We drop shows every single week. If you love Disney parks and are a Disney foodie, you'll love that show. You can also follow me, Aljon Rocks on Instagram, Aljon Rocks on Instagram. And be sure to also check out the Animation Y'all Expo. We're going to be there in Nashville. So if you love animation and you love all having great art and these expos and things, check out Animation Y'all Expo, April 10th through 12th. Check out Dave, if you would, Tunes Behind the Tunes on Sirius XM Disney Hits, channel 133. All throughout this month, he's got great insights into the music behind the Disney films. Check out oldmillpress.com, where you can get signed copies of the newly released Art of John Canemaker and Animator's Garden by John Canemaker, and A Spoonful of Sugar, the story of Upjohn Pharmacy in Disneyland by Stephen Hall. Check that out as well. Once again, oldmillpress.com for all those great books and so many other great books that Dave has published over the years. Also, check out his content and free stuff. Yes, he's giving away some free stuff there at davidbossert.com. Link is in our show notes. Thank you all once again for checking out our show. Big shout out to our friends there at Source Radio at srsounds.com. All Disney music all day long at srsounds.com. Check them out. In the meantime, as Dave always says, be good to each other. Be safe out there in that snow, in that ice. Please drive carefully. And we will see you next week on a whole new episode of Skull Rock Podcast. Take care.